Maybe some background laughter would be nice. I don't know.
I'll be like Stephen Colbert's wife that sits on the outside of the screen and laughs.
Do you? We know what that bus route looks like. We know what that hike looks like to the shelter with all your stuff. We know what it feels like to get rained on and snowed on.
Hello, Boulder and the wider world. This is the Sharing Boulder podcast. My name is Philip Ogren, and for episode 11, I sat down with Jennifer Livovich at a park in southeast Boulder. Jen is the founder and executive director of Feet Forward, a 501c3 nonprofit organization that provides services to individuals experiencing homelessness. As a person who has experienced homelessness herself, Jen has deep connections with Boulder's unhoused population and leverages her first-hand knowledge to provide services that are thoughtful, compassionate, and meet people where they are at. I really appreciate Jen's no-nonsense, pragmatic approach, and I learn a lot from our conversation. This episode of Sharing Boulder was recorded in front of a live audience of one, my wife, Akane Ogren, who despite her initial intentions of watching quietly, joined in on the conversation several times along the way. Near the end of the conversation, a young man who was perhaps unhoused approached us and asked for drugs. The audio is not great during this segment, but I left this exchange in the podcast for reasons that I hope will be clear when you keep listening. At the end of the episode, and in the show notes at sharingboulder.us, there is a list of things you can do to help the homeless today here in Boulder. Some of them are small and simple, and some of them are big and complicated. We hope that you are inspired by this episode with Jennifer Livovich of Feet Forward.
Hello, welcome to Sharing Boulder. I'm with Jen Livovich, who is the executive director of Feet Forward. So thank you so much for taking time. You were telling us about how busy your schedule is right now with school and other engagements, and so I really appreciate that you carved out some time this evening to talk with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
Can you maybe just start off by giving us a sketch of Feet Forward and what that's all about?
Sure. So Feet Forward is a Boulder-based nonprofit, a 501c3. We are peer-led. Myself and about 50% of our core volunteer staff have previous experience in homelessness, place-based right here at Boulder. We provide a weekly event that provides hot food through a program I created called It Does Not Take a Holiday.
It does not take a holiday.
Because we believe everyone deserves a hot meal on any day.
Not just Christmas Eve is what
not
you're
just
saying.
Thanksgiving, yeah. Not just and so I started that program in January of this year, and I partnered with some local restaurants like Sancho's Authentic Mexican Restaurant. Sean Camden is a tremendous individual, and he has been basically my ride or die out there in freezing weather and the hottest of days. Rosati's Pizza in Louisville also provides foods, and then some faith-based organizations as well. So weekly we're providing hot meals for 100 people.
Where does that take place?
So when the weather's bad and nobody wants to be at the parks, we are at the Boulder Band Shell. Currently we are utilizing as much shade as possible, and so we are near 13th Street across from Deshaunby Tea House. Our events are community based, and so because I am previously unhoused here right in Boulder, I have somewhat lengthy and unique histories with some of our local service providers, and so our relationships have evolved and they become more of professional networks, if you will, and also friends. And so at our events, we are currently hosting, and we have been hosting, multiple local service providers who come to our events. They peruse the crowd. And
do they set up a poster, or they're just there with maybe flyers or?
It's all very informal.
Okay.
And they are meeting clients where they're at. And this is helping to expedite housing processes. This is helping to identify people who may be prioritized for housing, who, let's say, are off the grid or not engaged with services. And so it's really become, it's not a feed. We provide a multitude of resources based on whatever I have donated. That's weather appropriate. And more recently, we created a portable charging station because charging phones is a large challenge for people outside. And then we also started to offer haircuts.
Oh, nice.
It's incredible. When you get a haircut, anyone feels better. And
I call it haircut high. When you
right, and
you can get up earlier and stay up later, and you feel better.
So the name of that program is called Keep Your Head Up Haircuts.
Cool.
And it's really taken off, and you can just see a difference in a person before they get their haircut and after. And we've had one of our most recent haircuts actually get a job 2 days later.
Wow. Nice.
I know, it's great.
Yeah. So you led off with this phrase peer-led. And I think what you mean, that's not a statement about the relationships within the organization. It's more a statement about your relationships with the people you're providing service to. Is that right? So because many people in your organization were formerly unhoused.
Correct.
It's like you have that peer relationship. You have that experience. You have that lived experience, right? So that you can relate to folks.
Right.
In a more meaningful way.
So the term peer actually, so there are actual professional roles that are considered paraprofessionals, and they originated in the mental health field. And so people who may have struggled with unmanaged mental health that were able to recover from that were, and they still are present in mental health, are paid paraprofessionals that provide peer support for people who are still struggling with mental health. They're not clinicians. They sort of are, I don't know the best way to describe it. They're not clinicians. They walk alongside with a person. They can be a mentor. They can be a realistic role model. They have been proven to have a better connection with those that they support, and so more recently there's been an expansion for mental health, and so they're starting to employ peer roles within the criminal justice system, primarily in community reintegration. There's also peer roles expanding in homeless services, and then addiction with peer recovery coaches. So when I say peer-led, what I mean is that the bulk of people who are providing these services have been there and done that, and all right here in Boulder. So we have an extensive history here, and one at maybe various times. And so we are able to relate to the people who are still outside. We know where they're camping. We know what that bus route looks like. We know what that hike looks like to the shelter with all your stuff. We know what it feels like to get rained on and snowed on. Personally,
and removed, I assume.
Well, they weren't necessarily removing me like that when I was outside. I spent 4.5 years, and most people didn't use tents at that time, but criminalization was certainly in place.
Yeah.
I can tell you from the number of presentations I've given, and because I have my own ability to gain my own records, in the height of my involvement with the police, I received 51 citations, largely associated to sleeping outside. I spent 266 nights in our jail at $139 and some change every night. And so I cost our community a lot of money just because I didn't have a house. So, but there wasn't this ban on tents at that time, but people weren't using tents. Most of us were really using the built environment and sleeping under maybe extended roofs, or even here, like for example. Yeah, this gazebo would have been great.
Well, so that
It would have been great.
That actually makes me think of a question I've been kind of pondering as you've been talking, and that is, so I was listening to a podcast within the last couple of years that described homelessness as being mostly people sleeping in cars in a lot of communities, and the kind of like the relative frequency of people like sleeping outside or sleeping in tents was somewhat lower, but or a lot lower, like for some suburban metropolitan areas, for example. But I'm curious if that's true in Boulder, or if like are a lot of homeless people in their cars driving around from neighborhood, to different parking lots, or.
Okay, so there are definitely people that are living in their cars.
Yeah.
In order to get an accurate number of how many people are in their cars, it's impossible.
Yeah.
There are definitely people living in their cars. There is not a safe place for anyone to park.
Yeah.
So it's all about keep it moving. Keep it moving and keep it moving. So having a car and being homeless it can be a hindrance.
Yeah.
With that said, I can tell you that there are people who are living in cars who attend my Feet Forward's events on Tuesdays. Are they droves of people coming in cars? No. But yes, there definitely are. There definitely are, and I couldn't begin to tell you how many people.
Well, the reason I ask is because one of the points that this other podcast made is that because a lot of homeless people are mobile with their cars, it kind of hides the extent of the problem. Like you visibly see people that are in tents taking up residence along a creek path or whatever. But if that's only a small fraction of the entire problem, then there's a hidden aspect to homelessness that's sort of like maybe I don't know, maybe works against people being aware of just how big the problem is.
Right, and it's about to get bigger. So eviction protections are gone, except for people who have already applied for rental assistance and are in limbo with that. To speak to your question, so every year HUD selects a day. It's typically in January, and they call it the point in time count. And so and every odd year are the numbers that you want to pay attention to. Because every odd year, every service provider, such as shelters, transitional housing, domestic violence, safe houses, or shelters, and then outreach efforts are made. They all, at the same time, across the nation, have people fill out these self-reporting surveys, and from that is how they get a best guesstimate, if you will, of how many people are experiencing homelessness on that particular day, and so they call that the point in time count. And so then it's, obviously it's broken down, and so Boulder County for 2021, I believe those numbers were 676 people were experiencing homelessness in Boulder County. Well, I can tell you that it's always a largely undercounted.
Yeah, that seems low.
And I sit on our Continuum of Care's Regional Governing Council as a voting member, and I had a somewhat informational interview with the executive director, Matt Meyer, and I talked about this, the point in time count, because it does not give us, it's a snapshot of who might be in the right place on that one day. And so those numbers just never sat right with me.
Yeah.
And he said that pretty much a good way to get an idea of what your community's work, in terms of population, is to multiply that point in time count number by 1.4 or 1.5. So that would put Boulder County at over 1,000.
Okay, that's both the entire county.
Yes.
Yeah.
However, Boulder has a larger presence of people who are unhoused. You have to take into consideration that within our county, Lafayette and Louisville offer nothing in terms of services. They have no shelter. There's nothing there, and so people are left who are actually homeless are left to have to choose between Boulder or Longmont.
Interesting.
And so that's one contributing factor to why our numbers are higher. There are probably some others as well, but it's my experience that people love Boulder, and diverse people move here every single month. Some are housed and some aren't, and it's just gorgeous here. And I can speak to this. While I was unhoused in Boulder, the rest of the unhoused community, we loved this place. I mean, we loved this community, even though it didn't necessarily love us back. And we weren't going anywhere. And that can still be said about the unhoused community today. Once you come here and it draws you in, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter what policies are passed. If the police are arresting people left and right, or they're going to take their tent. Once people love Boulder, they love Boulder. They're staying.
Well, I wonder if there's an aspect of it where they love each other, right? There's some community within the
unhoused community?
Yeah, the unhoused community.
Absolutely.
And so is it a friendly crowd?
I mean, it's an interesting dynamic. So, while I was spent the 4.5 years I did in Boulder, you develop these strong bonds. And, I mean, you're literally out there in elements where there's nights you don't even know if you're going to survive, and you may have 1 or 2 blankets. I remember, like sleeping in a dog pile with like 6 people, sustain body heat with 2 sleeping bags over us. You develop these bonds. I mean, you don't do that with everybody,
No.
right? And what I've noticed, I definitely knew that was happening, like this sense of community, but I didn't realize how strong it was until I climbed out of homelessness and I started to reintegrate back into the normal world where, I'd spent the bulk of my life in the normal world, and I thought, and I was working a part-time job, and I had an emergency, and I couldn't find anybody who would cover my shift or switch with me. And it just reminded me like how the unhoused community, of course I didn't have a job when I was unhoused, but if I didn't have a blanket or I didn't have, my socks were wet, somebody was always, multiple people stepping up to the plate and saying, Jen, I've got you. Jen, or let me go find you a pair of shoes. I mean, and so it's just, my time spent there was just like climbing out it was just a gift. It was this gift in multiple ways because it taught me about community. I had no clue what that looked like or felt like before I became homeless.
I would hate to idealize what homelessness is like. I've never experienced it myself. I have spent a lot of time in apartments and houses, and I just know that a lot of people are feeling very isolated in those structures, right? They like you just said, like you had a crisis where you didn't know who to call because you're probably in an apartment by yourself, for example. I hadn't really thought about how if you're in an unhoused population, there's no structural barriers, like physical barriers between people. And so the possibility of having a dog pile 6 people under, I mean, I'm not saying that was fun, but the connection that you make sounds like that's meaningful. Is that is
It
that
is.
okay to ask?
Well, yeah, no, it is. It is, and so one of the things that can be a large challenge for people who finally make it to prioritization for housing, because we're only housing about 10 to 12% of our unhoused community. That's not necessarily the fault of Boulder or Boulder County or the shelter. If one of the things I really like to study at Colorado State University is federal housing policy programs and funding sources. And so if you look at from like the top, they're constantly under scrutiny. Their budget's always on the chopping block. And so they actually set this housing first as a national model. And, without really the adequate resources to make it all happen. So it's not every person that you see who's outside today that's going to meet the prioritization involved to get housing.
Yeah.
But for those that do, it can be a tremendous challenge moving from one environment
Disorienting, you mean? Like,
and into another. And so I know multiple people that struggle with that. They feel claustrophobic. They can get depressed. If they already had depression, it's heightened. Some people who get into an apartment still sleep outside. Some people who get into an apartment have to have their windows open so they can hear the birds and the noise. And so that transition can be very difficult. And then here comes that piece of that loyalty, right? Those bonds that are developed. So now you're inside and it's snowing and it's freezing and you've got all your people you love outside.
ouch.
It's tough. And so many people invite their people, basically their parks, to the apartments. And so what happens is it leads to negative community behaviors, right? Because things can get loud. You're not supposed to have guests over, except for up to maybe 15 nights out of the year. And so it's something that's not talked about, but it's something that I advocate for, which is peer support roles for people who are transitioning from outside to inside, and to also provide aftercare. Because some people have lost complete touch with basic life skills. They don't even understand what an electric bill is. These things can be so overwhelming. And for many people, they don't get support services when they get housed. They literally get their apartment and it's like, see you later.
Oof.
So, that just speaks to those bonds. And so for me personally, the in-house community wasn't getting housed when I was homeless. The answer for people like me, because I had gotten those 51 tickets, I had this extensive relationship with the municipal court system, was to send me to a program. And so I was sent to a program in the middle of nowhere and stayed there for 18 months. It's called Fort Lyon. And when I went, my left foot was ready to fall off. I had frostbite. My foot was black. And that's what prompted me to go. It was my moment. Like, seeing that on my foot, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm not invincible. So what? I've stayed out here and survived 4.5 years. My foot's falling off. And it was my moment. And I feel like people have moments. And so I went. And when I graduated, I was able to get some limited assistance for housing through the state. And I had to navigate all of that by myself, which was an invaluable learning experience. And I relocated back in August of 2018. And that was something I had to struggle with. Because while I was at that program, my friend Benjamin Harvey froze to death. They found him on Christmas morning up on the hill. And I made all these plans while I was gone in my head, but putting them into action when I came back, and that sense of loyalty was not as easy as it was when I was 6 hours away.
Yeah.
So that's when I started to collect socks under an initiative called Save a Toe. Saving toes, preventing frostbite, and started to distribute them around the parks to all my people, right? All my people I sleep under bridges with. And it didn't take long before they stopped assuming I was gonna like hang out or invited me to stick around. And so I didn't realize, but I was reestablishing myself within my own community.
Yeah.
And so that is kind of how, well, that was really the beginning of Feet Forward. So now if you can see the connection, a Save a Toe, the little Feet Forward.
I love it. So it's like, because it's like,
Yeah.
it's a nice metaphor to talk about walking and making forward momentum. But I didn't realize there's like a literal connection to feet with the name. So that's super cool. Love it.
Yeah, I mean, and so the thing is multiple people get frostbite every year.
Yeah.
And while I was homeless, many people would say they had frostbite, and I didn't believe it was a real thing. I thought they were exaggerating and they were just cold. But then I got it, you know, which is like, I mean, that whole situation could be applied to a lot of things. So it's even like homelessness, right? So you're housed today. Let's say you have a medical emergency, and you can't afford to, like, something just happens, and now all of a sudden you have to rely on services for the first time. You don't even know what they are.
Yeah.
But once you get it, you learn real fast. Right? Once you have to use those resources, you learn very quickly. So yeah.
So I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a community of friends that are formerly unhoused people? Are there a lot of people in your situation where you can look back and say that was my time being unhoused, or is it really unusual to come out of it and have, like you seem like you're like, tackling a new career and you have a place to live, and things are looking better than they were when you were unhoused. And so is that unusual, or is that a path that a lot of people are on?
I think it looks differently for everybody, and a lot of people. So here's a couple things I will say. So I was raised in an upper middle class family. Education was always instilled in me. I grew up around diversity and culture and some nice stuff when I was growing up near Chicago. Okay, so some would say I had better life chances. Even in my adult life, I worked in the private sector in leadership and was responsible and accountable for almost $10 million in sales annually. And
That's like the company you worked for.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was a retail clothing and footwear buyer for a major independent retailer. And so I'd like to tell this part of my story because it illustrates the point that none of us know what's around the corner in life.
Yeah.
I did that. I had that position for a decade, and then I left and got involved with corporate wireless sales. And then I just have a long history of cultivating relationships, maximizing profits, and so that's where my mind was at. My mind was about that. In my adult life, I continued to enjoy some finer things. In 2003, I stayed at the Broadmoor. And in 2013, I was sleeping under Arapahoe and Broadway Bridge. So, some people might say, well, what happened? Like, what happened? How? Well, there's a few things that happened. Both my parents died when I was 20. I was thrust into like the real world without really having a full view of what that was. I had a 15-year-old sister. I rebounded from that quickly and professionally moved along. But I would make unhealthy choices when it came to relationships, and it was just a series of things. And then finally I was married in an abusive situation, and I had to make a choice, which was like save my life and lose all my stuff, or stay, and who knows what might
Take
happen.
a risk, yeah.
Right, and so that was my pathway to becoming homeless. So I just always like to say no one can be certain of what's around the corner. And as a person that has done outreach in one form or fashion, either through Save a Toe or with Feet Forward, I can tell you that it's so diverse. Like, each person has their own story, and that's the unfortunate part about homelessness, is that everyone gets grouped together, like clumped together. I never appreciated that.
Well, so that's a nice, that gives me more caution about asking this next question, because I sort of understand there's no short there's no short answer, but maybe like just, well, here's an exercise. Here's a magic wand that you can wave around. How do you solve homelessness?
How do I solve homelessness?
Yeah,
How do we solve
yeah,
homelessness?
how do we do it? What's well, like, I mean,
What would you
there's
like to see us try?
yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, so as a pretty informed person on our service structure, as well as I would consider myself rather proficient in federal policy. First of all, we don't have the housing stock. We don't have the housing stock. We have a cash in lieu option, which, is a blessing and a curse at the same time. We have these prioritizations in place for people who are unhoused to become housed.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's like that 10, 12%. And everybody else is just like, pay your dues, lose some toes, cost us a lot of money, and then eventually you'll get there, right? And so what?
I don't know if you know this, but this podcast is all about pro-housing, better land use, and I just have this really kind of fundamental belief that if we made more room for more housing in our community would be more inclusive. It would be more beautiful. Like, we've handed the community over to cars and lawns, and a lot of that space could be used for affordable housing, for luxury condos, for all kinds of housing. And so I appreciate that you led off with that. We need more housing stock. It's like, I feel like the housing in Boulder is like a ladder where the last 3 rungs have been cut off, and like, to get to the first rung of housing is not an easy task.
Well, if you look, okay, so 2015, over 50% of our workforce didn't live here because they couldn't afford to live here.
Yeah.
And so when you think of inclusivity and community development, one of the aspects of that is to draw people from outside your community inward. Like, you want to bring them into your community, right? That's inclusivity. And we don't even have the housing stock for that particular group of people. So I have to say to myself, well, how do we expect to house the unhoused community, right? We can't even house the people affordably who are responsible for stimulating our local economy. And so I just wanted to touch base on this very quickly. So we're looking at, in terms of the unhoused community, we're looking at 10 to 12%. Maybe it'll be a little bit higher right now because there's a specific voucher out. Maybe at this point we might do 15% this year. But if we know like the prioritization takes people years to be outside, criminal justice involvement, high emergency reliance, right? We know, and just exorbitant community costs. If we know this, unmanaged mental health, substance misuse, if we know all of these things, then why are we not trying to attack it on both ends?
Yeah.
Why are we only focused on the 10 to 15% of people while everyone else is just on the wayside, costing everyone a lot of money and not being supported? And so my solution is alternative housing in in the form of a sober-supported transitional housing community. And what that would look like are single-room occupancies with on-site support services that had people like the peers of Feet Forward offering, that support as people walk along their journey. I would have on-site mental health care, educational opportunities, employment opportunities. And what we might see is a reduction in the people outside, which would reduce our community cost, because transitional housing also provides that layer, a level of stability that people need to address their medical needs, right, in a more preventative style. That would reduce emergency room reliance and just improve the overall health and wellness of not only the people that go there, but also the broader community.
So we're sitting in this park across from Fraser Meadows, which is this lovely facility, housing facility for seniors. And when I see that facility, I sometimes wonder, like, we're able to, as a society, put together this beautiful housing for aging seniors. Why can't we do that for transitional housing, or for people who need an efficiency or a single bedroom apartment? Is that campus? I mean, does that light up your imagination at all? Are you kind of thinking something more modest than that, or I don't know? I'm just
curious what it looks like. Well, first of all, it can't look like a correctional facility, which is what some of these places try to do. If you want to change behavior, then you need to change, like,
environment.
Correct. Yeah. And so what is something similar to that. Maybe without the big old.
It should be like the Tom's shoe company, where you have a company that can afford, and if they buy one, another one gets purchased, right? For someone who's unhoused.
Well, one thing because one thing I was thinking about this that I don't like is it segregates that population into this one giant place, right? And I was talking to an architect who's really interested in designing pro-social community structures, right? And he said that having formerly unhoused people living in established communities is so much better for them than
fringes.
Well, or putting them all together in like one place. So I mean, like this facility over here kind of makes me nervous in the sense of, like, it's just one more way to segregate people. So I don't know. I would love to see lots of housing infilled into our existing neighborhoods. But
I'm going to tell you why that's my solution, because it's we could use an existing space to create it. Medicaid also started to cover the inpatient cost for substance misuse treatment, January of 2021. So I'm looking in terms of resources that are available. I'm looking at a solution that would not take a decade, to happen. And I'm also looking at it from a public health point of view. Yeah. And some people accuse me of having an emotional connection to our unhoused community, and you know what I do.
Yeah,
and you know what?
You
Good.
better.
Good, because if I didn't, I realized when I moved back from that program that I am more helpful to the unhoused community being right here than I am being with them right in the parks. And but if I didn't have an emotional connection to this community, in particular in Boulder, I wouldn't be doing any of this. Yeah. So yeah, when I come up with with those types of solutions, we could look at a hotel conversion. I mean, those are happening all across the nation.
Do you have a dream property in Boulder that you'd love to convert?
I mean, not particularly. We don't really have like this over representation of hotels. Yeah, I mean, I don't really.
One of the challenges I've heard is that North Boulder facility is so far from anything, right? It's on the outskirts of everything that any kind of supports that the unhoused community might need, and just getting there on a daily basis is such a challenge. As you mentioned, getting up the hill.
It's not fun.
Yeah.
Even in nice weather.
Yeah. When you talk about, intermingle, like having them, within the community, it could be one building, but bring it closer into the center of town.
Well, I mean,
right?
It's deliberate. It's deliberately out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
And that tends to be the case with shelters or anything that might be viewed unsightly or unwanted. Many communities, not just here. But yeah, that walk isn't fun at all. They do have a free bus, but I mean, it's over capacity, and if you have mental health conditions or PTSD, it is not the best ride for you. I feel like I remember taking that bus. I would rather walk than take that bus. Like that terrible walk.
You're talking about the skip or the 204?
It's a free bus that just goes to the shelter, and so
it just picks up it has a
route? It has 5 o'clock. It picks up downtown, and you're not on it. You're out of luck. And then the same bus leaves at 8 in the morning, and it is so packed, and really, you feel like you need a tetanus shot when you get off there. It's just
because the bus is like rough around the edges. Is that what you're saying?
The whole thing.
Yeah.
It's a free bus, and so this touches on another point. I don't feel like the people who are outside, I value the people who are outside. I see them as human beings. Some have problems, right? And sometimes those problems are more visible to the broader community because they're living outside, right? There are just as many people inside who have a lot more problems they're able to disguise, right? Or, not share with the world. And I feel like there are some people that don't place value in the people who live outside, and so they should be happy that they have a free bus, right? Never mind the fact that it's 40 people over capacity. It's completely unsafe. But they have a free bus, and they need to use that. Or, I just feel like that's been the attitude about so much.
Yeah, I remember hearing some pushback against improving the North Boulder Library, and because worrying about that it would be yet another place. How's it going? Good.
What's going on? We're doing an interview, love. You're on film right now. Do you know that?
We're recording an interview for a podcast.
What do you need? Talk to me. What do you need? No, we do not have any of that. You don't need that either. You have a good night. And so this is the thing I'm talking about. So we have people that, I'm an advocate for the unhoused community, right? I used to be homeless, and so I think a lot of people automatically assume that everything I say about our unhoused community or our policy is going to trash it. Or I'm always going to be about we need more for this, and we need for the unhoused, and we need this. I'm about more effective, right? Yeah. More effective services. And about real and raw conversations. And so, to see that is just, that's a dime a dozen right there. Someone coming up to ask you for drugs. This is all day, every day, and it's not limited to people outside. It is people inside as well, which is why I go back to, we have no treatment. There is zero treatment. And check it out. The jail the criminal justice system decriminalized hard street drugs prior to COVID. Okay? Anytime there is decriminalization done by criminal justice system, it automatically increases the unhoused community. You know why? Because people spend less time in jail.
Yeah.
Okay, and to me, what that did was send a message to the city council, that we are not your shelter, and we are not your treatment facility. And so,
and that's as it should be.
correct. But then here we go. We have zero options.
Yeah, right.
There is nothing in this community at all. You see all of these little outpatient programs that are sprouting up. And those are great for people who have stability, and structure in their lives, and can wear clean clothes and take a shower and get a good night's sleep and have a mom or a dad or friend drive them. It's not effective for people who are outside. So we have these jail programs who I have healthy relationships with, don't get me wrong, but since I've been back for the 3 years, they're all talking about the same thing, which is reducing recidivism. How do you do that when the bulk of your jail population are unhoused and there's nowhere to send anybody? So this is why I like another driving force, another benefit of why we need sober supported living here. And it can't be for 6 weeks. It has got to be long term. Transitional housing will allow a person to stay for up to 2 years.
Can we revisit this scenario just a bit?
Yeah.
So I
Did
know,
you like how I handled that?
Well,
I like you don't need that shit either. I
well,
appreciated your
there's an
tone.
aspect of I'm like a deer in the headlights in that moment, and
Yeah,
I don't know what my responsibility.
Mosquito, right
Do
here.
I?
Yeah, there you go.
I don't know what my responsibility is as a fellow human being.
You didn't know how to handle that.
Well, and even kind of thinking about it now, I don't know what I could offer this young man to help him this evening, except cash. And I mean, how do you feel about if he had asked for cash? Is it okay for me to give it to him, or is that kind of?
I mean, it's okay
working?
for you to do whatever you prefer to do.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things that people may not know if they see somebody, who's outside, and you might be concerned about them. Let's say they might be having a mental health situation, or they're sleeping, but maybe they don't look safe, or they're acting erratically, or they're passed out on a sidewalk. Whatever the case may be, you can call the police non-emergency, and you can request a welfare check.
Okay.
So that is a less invasive. They're not showing up with, necessarily the intentions of arresting a person. They're coming to basically check on their overall mental health, physical wellness.
Should we be doing that now? I'm not trying to be.
Well, I don't know where
facetious,
this kid
yeah.
went, and chances are probably not far.
I mean-
Probably not far. And so, I, as a person who used to be unhoused, I can say things to people who are outside that wouldn't be appropriate if you did.
Yeah.
And I don't even think you would feel comfortable saying any of those things.
Yeah, probably.
Right, and so I have the ability to just keep very real with people. Even though I was not homeless with him, he probably could tell that I've been around and seen some things. So yeah, but I mean, I think for ordinary people that may be concerned about somebody, rather than calling the police to, create a situation where they may
It's
pick
a
up a
security
charge.
concern or whatever.
Yeah, when somebody, mental health, or maybe they're too intoxicated, or you feel like whatever the case might be, and you're just genuinely concerned, you can call and do a welfare check.
Yeah. Okay. Good
What was
advice.
some help maybe that you received that you really appreciated while you were unhoused for those 4.5 years?
Yeah, so while I was also unhoused, I was in like the height of my alcoholism. I was drinking a minimum of a gallon of vodka every day. Every decision I made each and every day was guided by that. I mean, every decision. And so what happened for me, which is very relatable to some people who are still here in Boulder, who struggle with substance misuse, is every day becomes Groundhog Day. It's like that's all you do. It's just like that's all I wanted to. I mean, it wasn't even I didn't wanted to do it. It was like that's what I don't know how my life came to that, but that's where it was. And so, like I said, they weren't housing people like me at that time. And the municipal court system created a new position called a court navigator. And they hired this woman named Elizabeth Robinson. Now, the interesting thing about Elizabeth was that she had previously worked for another resource in town that I didn't really go to too much. I didn't really go to any of those things, I was rogue, but I'd seen her, and she'd come to see me in jail, and she talked to me about this program, and it was the summer, and I said, you gotta be nuts. I'm not leaving Boulder in the summer.
It's the best time of year.
I'm not going anywhere, and so, fast forward till this was the end of 2016, December, I got frostbite. So I was in the detox. I didn't know I had frostbite, and then I took a sack off, and it was just bad. Went to the hospital, and so Elizabeth came to see me at the detox. The point about Elizabeth Robinson is that even after I left to go to that program, even when I was no longer technically her client, she kept in contact with me, and she continued to support me, right, to see how I was doing. When I was on my own with my housing process, she let me, I had to learn how to advocate for myself. I had to really advocate for myself to get into housing. And from that, we just developed a friendship. That woman was and still has been absolutely instrumental in my life changing. Today she is on my board.
Oh, nice.
Oh, wow.
Very cool.
Yeah. So, I think that just, brings up an important point. That, just one person, having patience, building trust, treating you as a human being, like you have value. Just look. I don't know what my life would have looked like without her. I could have been, I don't know, sleeping under that tree over there today. So, she didn't do all the hard work, but, just having that supportive piece, and then just, yeah, I guess just the believing that you can do it, right? So, yeah.
Cool.
She's awesome.
Well, and then also she had that institutional support to do that work, right? So, it seems like if we empower the institutions with enough money and resources and permission to build stuff, there's a lot of work that could go forward if we sort of could remove a lot of the barriers. Is that true? I guess I'm making conclusions.
Yeah, I think, if the money's put into the right channels and to the right institutions, personally, I think it's time that we start looking at some other approaches to how we're going to make a dent in homelessness, because it's not working for everybody. And I understand there's national models, that are, pretty much mandated by HUD, and in order to get their resources, you need to play that game. I get it, but we're also a community.
Yeah.
And we need to invest in our people, regardless of if you like the way they look or you don't. Or if they live in a tent or they live in North Boulder. We're community, and we need to act like one.
What are your needs right now, your organizations, in order to do the good work that you're doing? Right? What are your barriers, your organization's unique barriers that you need support with?
I'll try to keep it simple. I have a lot of needs. So I always try to keep staple socks because that's how I started, and so I like to hand out new socks. We do this year round, so weather appropriate socks are key, right? We're currently missing a consistent food partner for the first Tuesday of every month. And so it's been difficult because of COVID and restaurants, trying to recover from that. And then now you add the can't find employees, so that's another need. My biggest ask and need is that we need a van. We need a van to transport our stuff. Because right now I have 4 to 6 cars. Well, I'd say on the average, I have 4 SUVs or a truck coming to load our stuff. So a van would be the most helpful. And then I could increase my outreach, right? Because then I could drive around, and I wouldn't just be in one location. I'd always be in that location on Tuesdays.
How about cash? Would cash be helpful? Can we?
Yes, I'll
can
definitely.
I encourage listeners to go to feetforward.org? Is that the website?
Yes.
And donate? Is that
yes.
Okay, I'll do that then.
We can, yes.
Listeners, go to the to feetforward.org.
Run!
The following is a list of ways you can help unhoused people in our community. One way is to support Feet Forward, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. They accept cash donations on their website. You can contact Feet Forward directly to coordinate other kinds of donations. Jen says that they always need good, new socks, especially in the winter. They also need a van. They also need a food partner for their hot meal program for the first Tuesday of each month. Please contact Jen for further information. In the episode, I asked Jen about giving cash directly to homeless people. She said that a better option is to give out gift cards to local grocery stores and coffee shops. Another possibility is to give out bus passes. A day pass would be ideal, but unfortunately requires activation and it is time-stamped. However, you can buy booklets of one-way local passes at any service desk at most grocery stores in Boulder. Finally, if you are concerned about someone who is experiencing homelessness and may be in a crisis situation, then you can call the Boulder Police Department and request a non-emergency welfare check. This episode of Sharing Boulder was produced by David Adamson and Philip Ogren. Sound and video editing was done by Philip Ogren. The intro music was sampled from Osladum by Gilberto Gil and is available for use under the Creative Commons Sampling Plus license. Please visit us at sharingboulder.us for show notes and previous episodes.